Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said that the writ of the state will be established at all costs and no one would be allowed to derail the hard-earned gains and successes in the war on terror through the sacrifices of the armed forces and the nation. Pakistan's Foreign Minister, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto has categorically stated that TTP is Pakistan's absolute red line. He was addressing the Atlantic Council in Washington, and he also said, absolutely, we will be willing to consider each and every option to ensure the safety and security of our people. At the same time, he has urged the world powers to work with Afghanistan's de facto rulers to stabilize the region. Similar sort of a call was made by Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Mr. Munir Akram, who said, let me quote, that coercion and isolation have not proved successful in the past, and to realize international community's objectives, we need a patient engagement with the interim government, unquote. On the other hand, at the same time, Afghan Taliban have barred women from public and private universities, and this particular decision by the interim Afghan government has been condemned by the world powers. The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan has urged the Afghan authorities to immediately revoke this particular decision. At the same time, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari has also expressed disappointment on this decision by the Afghan authorities and urged them to revisit the decision. Now, how the Afghan Taliban's actions might push them further away from the international recognition, and how Pakistani authorities can impress upon the Afghan Taliban to not allow the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan to operate from the Afghanistan's soil against Pakistan, and how the international community should be engaging with the Afghan Taliban authorities, and also what sort of a role the regional countries can play in order to address the rising threat of the spillover of terrorism from the Afghan soil. We'll be discussing all these aspects, and to discuss that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Saifullah Mahsud. He's President, FATA Research Center. Mr. Mahsud, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And we are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Moazzam Hashmi. He's expert foreign affairs. Dr. Hashmi, thank you very much for your time also for being on Views on News. We really appreciate that. And at the same time on Skype, we are being joined by Lieutenant General retired Raza Muhammad Khan. He's former president of National Defense University. General Raza, thank you very much once again for your time for being on Views on News. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, General Raza. Pakistan's Prime Minister has categorically said that the hard-earned gains from the war on terror wouldn't be allowed to be derailed by anyone, and the writ of the state would be established at all costs. Similarly, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari in categorical terms has said that TTP is a red line, an absolute red line for Pakistan. He has also alluded to the hammer and anvil strategy with cooperation of the Afghan authorities. Would you like to shed a little bit of light regarding this particular strategy, how Pakistan is going to deal with this particular TTP threat?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think we have to have a multiple-pronged strategy, to deal with the threat of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, whether it is from the TTP or the BLA or their supporters from RAW or other quarters. In that, I think first of all, we need to engage with the senior-most Afghan leaders. Time has now come that we directly approach the supreme leader of Afghanistan. And I'm talking of, Mr. Habatullah Akhundzada. Then I'm talking of the Prime Minister of Afghanistan, Mr. Hassan Akhund. I'm talking of, direct interactions with their interior minister, Mr. Sirajuddin Haqqani. We've already, established connections with the Minister of their Foreign Affairs. But I think more sort of connections are needed with the Ministry of Defense, Mullah Yaqub, and the Minister for the border security and tribal affairs. These are the important people, I think, who needs to be sensitized. And I think Pakistan should actually formally ask them to declare the TTP elements, in particular there, as whatever they are doing against Pakistan or others, as something which is against the religion of Islam because they are killing Muslims, and therefore a fatwa or a religious edict needs to be issued by the senior religious leaders of Afghanistan. That is the least that they can do if they think that they do not have the capacity for the time being, to control them. That is one. The other thing is, we ourselves probably have forgotten, the national security policy, which was actually formulated by the previous government, but it had directions for the other ministries. It had direction for the provincial government. You heard, one of the provincial government of KPK after the Banu incident that countering terrorism, they're not responsible for that, and that this is the responsibility of the federation. I think the national security policy very clearly states that this is a joint responsibility. All provinces were required, to raise a counter-terrorism department from their police forces, and a counter-terrorism force was supposed to be raised, and it was supposed to be funded. So I think that needs to be done at in all the provinces, and unless that is done, I think there are going to be complications. Then again, we have totally probably forgotten about the return of the Afghan refugees. 2.8 million refugees are still here. We are struggling, against our, any additional burden on an economy. And if the Afghan Taliban have stated, that there is now relative peace there, so I think their return must start to Afghanistan. At the same time, again, I would say that we have a national action plan, and I think that was passed by the parliament. That needs to be revisited, and I think the provincial action plans against terrorism needs to be formulated as well. So, unless these things are done, I think our response to terrorism will not be complete. But coming back to your question, I think whatever has been said at the level of the Foreign Office, I think I fully support them. And not only the TPP is our red line, but any terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, from any terrorist groups, I think they are all our red lines, and it is the responsibility of the present Afghanistan government to honor their commitment with Pakistan and with the rest of the world in Doha, that they would not allow Afghanistan to be used for terrorism against any other country.
Right, General Raza, your point is well taken. Mr. Mahsud, how important it is for the Pakistani authorities to engage directly with the top leadership of the Afghan Taliban in order to deal with the TTP threat in particular?
It's very important, but I don't think that that is something that they have not done so far. I think they have done it repeatedly, but perhaps there are either issues of intent or capacity when it comes to the Afghan interim government right now, which is why the Taliban, the Afghan government has not been able to fulfill the promises that it has made with the world under the Doha agreement, and the repeated complaints that Pakistan has made with them, due to the fact that the TTP uses Afghan soil to mount attacks against Pakistan, but those have kind of fallen on deaf ears so far. So so in that scenario, I would say either the intent to do something against TTP is lacking on part of the Afghan government, or they don't have the capacity given the economic problems that they face in the country, given that there is a resurgent Daesh, there is ETIM, there is the Northern Alliance that is kind of again raising its head in the north of Afghanistan. So I would say it's either intent or capacity.
Right, Dr. Hashmi, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto has also said that it is the question of for the Afghan Taliban to demonstrate that will and the capacity in order to deal with that particular threat, that the Afghan soil is not used against Pakistan.
Right. The statement came from our foreign minister, and look at the statement from UN Secretary General regarding the human rights, and he has asked that Afghanistan should stop the attacks, and then Munir Akram Sahib, Ambassador Munir Akram. All bold, very timely statements, kudos for that. But like Mahsud Sahib has mentioned, whether it's a question of intention or whether it's a question of capability. The question is that when Afghanistan new government came in August 21, so they said that for their soil will not be used for attacks against Pakistan or any other, right? That was a commitment. So if you look at their political commitment, none of them have been promised. They talked about the women's also, that they will allow them. It never happened, and terrorists are being using their soil to attack Pakistan, and it's very regular. And as far as it's more of a question of ideological sympathy rather than capacity or intention. Ideological sympathy, what kind of a Taliban we are dealing right now. So they are not the pre-Al-Qaeda Taliban, they are the post-Al-Qaeda Taliban, and this new generation of Taliban is very much having an exposure and English speaking and English understanding kind, but they stick with the ideological rhetoric. That's their problem, and their rhetoric is that, so they have a coherence of ideological coherence or ideological sympathy, or they are on the same page with TTP. That's one issue. And also another point is that Afghan Taliban, they have international agenda. They want to expand further. They don't want to restrict themselves to Afghanistan alone. And first in the line of front is Pakistan. So that's an issue with that. So I am.
Wasn't there war against the international troops who came and invaded Afghanistan rather than expansion?
First, it was the war against the troops, and now the second on the line is that how they expand.
When the international troops have withdrawn from that particular country, and the Afghan Taliban took arms against the international troops. Once they have withdrawn from there, so what makes them? It's not the question of expansion. That they are looking forward to expand their territory in the neighboring countries.
No, it's not about the expansion of the territories, expansion of the ideology and like-minded people, over there. Like if you notice that, in August 2021, when Afghan government came, Taliban government came, there were a lot of people who celebrated their government in Pakistan.
When the interim Afghan authorities say whenever there is a condemnation of their violation of the commitment they made to the international community, they urge the world powers to not to interfere in the affairs of Afghanistan. So why ideological expansion? On one side, they are urging the international community not to interfere in the Afghanistan's affairs. On the other side, they look forward to have an ideological expansion in other
looking at that, their composition in the post-Al-Qaeda and the post-Al-Qaeda period. So that is what they want. They want to expand further. And expand further to have their influence on it. And because their agenda is not only just securing their territorial boundaries, they want to expand the ideological boundaries.
Right.
That's an issue.
General Raza, Pakistan's permanent representative, Mr. Munir Akram, has also urged the international community to patiently engage with the interim Afghan authorities. Now, what sort of an engagement that could be after we have seen the repeated violation of those commitments the Afghan authorities made with the international community, not only in the Doha peace deal, but also subsequent the Troika plus talks also, and there was an emphasis, very much similar sort of conditions were also put in that joint statement by the Troika plus also.
Yes, what he said was that probably, coercion did not work in the past, and it may not work in the future. And he was actually addressing the international community and asking them that they should continue their engagement with them rather than isolating them. I think that was a fair advice. But one has to see it's not only the international community but also Pakistan that are the Afghan government fulfilling their promises or the expectations that the international community of Pakistan has from them or not? Because I think everyone has a limit or a threshold of their patience. And if there is no response from the other side, then I think it is going to be very, very difficult for anyone. But coming back, to the response from Pakistan, I think in addition to engagement with the Taliban leadership at the highest possible level, I think we need to continue exerting, economic, political, and other pressures on them, to at least to ensure that there is no terrorism inside Pakistan. We have to give them, incentives and disincentives, and I talked about some of them earlier. The transit trade that they're having with Pakistan, in which we have given them, a lot of favorable conditions so that their economy does not collapse. Then, of course, the transit trade from a number of multiple routes. But unfortunately, you have seen what has happened at Chaman and Ghulamkili and other places. So it has to be a combination of incentives and disincentives. Uh, and we have to make sure that the sanctity of the international border is respected by them. Uh, the border fencing of Pak-Afghan border is almost complete, but I think there are still gaps in the Pakistan-Iran border, and some of these terrorists may be actually coming from there. So we have to complete that. We have to increase our vigilance there. We have to increase our vigilance, even on the regular crossing points, to make sure that no terrorist enters Pakistan in the garb of, let's say, traders or other categories. So all these, measures have to be put together, and I think we have to make sure that there is political stability again in Pakistan, whether it is at the provincial level or it is at the federal level, because unless that is there, it will be, I think, very difficult for the government or the armed forces or the security departments, to ensure that there is a coherent strategy against counter terrorism, and that it is applied and it has complete political ownership across the political divide.
Right. General Raza, when we talk about the economic incentives Pakistan had given to the Afghan authorities, it was particularly that owes to that the country was ravaged with war for 2 decades, especially in the war on terror. And there was a dire humanitarian and economic crisis that country was faced with, especially after the abrupt withdrawal of the international troops. That is what the favor Pakistan would have definitely done for the larger interest of the Afghan people over there. So don't you think there should be a realization that first Pakistan had always advocated a peaceful and a stable Afghanistan, and then also played a very important role in the peace and reconciliation efforts, and then also gave them economic incentives to avert that humanitarian crisis? Shouldn't there be a realization among the ranks of the Afghan Taliban that they should also fulfill their commitments?
I think absolutely that is what the people and the government of Pakistan expects from them. That there should be a quid pro quo kind of reaction. Unfortunately, that is not there, and it is actually now affecting the people of Pakistan who probably would be asking the government to have a relook at our Afghan policy, And I think the foreign minister, I think, made a mention of that, that we have to see whether we can continue with that policy or not. Some people to whom I have talked are saying that probably, we are following some kind of policy of appeasement in our relationship with Afghanistan. Now, this may be partially true, and as you rightly said, I think that was for the considerations of the condition of the people of Afghanistan. Because I think nobody should punish the people of Afghanistan for the decisions that their government takes or the action which it takes or does not take. So I think it also is the responsibility of the people of Afghanistan to actually prevail upon their leadership to give a quid pro quo kind of a response to whatever favors Pakistan is doing to them, and to respond to it in kind, rather than, I think, shutting their eyes to terrorism inside Pakistan, and sometimes giving sporadic statements which do not help the relationship between the two countries.
Right. Mr. Mahsud, do you think are these some sort of pressure tactics by the Afghan Taliban banning the women from attending the universities for higher education also? There was also a commitment in the Doha peace deal also that they would allow the women to participate in all aspects of life and let them to acquire education as well, and not countering that rising threat of militancy from the Afghan soil. Are these the pressure tactics to goad the international community to give them the international recognition? Is that so?
Look, it's a mind-boggling decision, frankly. I mean, who in their right mind would deny their own flesh and blood right to education and thereby a better life? So, it's completely mind-boggling, the promises that you just mentioned that they have made with the international community and with their own people with regard to women education and other human rights in the country. I mean, they are not fulfilling those. As was mentioned a while ago, that for recognition to happen, formal recognition to happen by other countries of Afghanistan, they need to make themselves attractive. This is hardly helping their case. So it can either be an issue of lack of funds because they are under a severe economic crunch in that country, or somebody was mentioning the other day that perhaps the security of women universities. It was mentioned that Daesh had attacked women universities a couple of times in Afghanistan, so perhaps that may be it. But these are all speculation. As I said, the decision itself is mind-boggling. It's I mean, in this day and age, for a country like Afghanistan, or for any country to prosper, you need all hands on board, and that is not something that perhaps the Taliban have realized so far, and they have put a ban on women education. First it was primary education, now it is the university education, and it has given them a very bad name. There has been condemnation from within the country and from all across the international community as well. I mean, women from Kabul, from different universities were out on the road protesting. In many instances, male students of the universities kind of refuse to take exams in protest against this decision by the Taliban. You go to Twitter, you go to all the social media, and you see a lot of condemnation coming Taliban's way by a lot of people who are from Afghanistan, and people that had been defending them on social media. So far they're finding it extremely hard to say anything in their defense for the step that they have taken. So for me, this is a mind-boggling, very, very unfortunate decision.
So just on the pretext of a possible threat from ISIS to the security of the students?
These are all speculation. This is not an official statement that has come from the Afghan government. Their Minister for Higher Education is going to appear on TV at 9 o'clock Pakistan Standard Time and perhaps respond to these very questions, but this is what the people are speculating.
Now, Dr. Hashmi, when the Afghan Taliban haven't been able to keep up those commitments made with the international community, don't you think they look so desperate for getting the international recognition at the same time? Don't you think these violations of the commitments are pushing them further away from that so badly wanted international recognition?
But certainly, Taliban are desperate for help. They are desperate for assistance. They want their money back, which is frozen in the US and other things, and they want something more. But the problem is, look at Taliban, how they are feeling. They are bubbling, or they are brimming with overconfidence, I would say, not the confidence, overconfidence. They believe that they have defeated United States, they have defeated foreign forces, thrown them out, moved them out of their territory, right. So now they think that they have an upper hand on dealing with affairs. As far their psychology is concerned, they are certainly battle hardened power to reckon with, I reiterate, but the problem is that their blackmailing technique has further hardened. And as for the women education is concerned, look at that what they have used first. In the first, when they came into power, winters was approaching, there were 6 major disease outbreaks over there. More than half of the population was under malnourished, under poverty and severe conditions over there. They have used humans as shield. They tried to use humans as shield, that the international community will pour in bags of dollars to them. But international community had other business to look at, and Pakistan, Taliban forgot that it's the Pakistan that has called an extraordinary meeting of foreign ministers of OIC here in Islamabad, and we have charted out a resolution. We called for help to Afghan Taliban, and not only that, we have extended some help to them as well. So they use shield them. Now they pressurize, they banned women education as a pressure tactic. Further arm twisting, that international community will see the human rights violation and all that. They said, all right, calm down. What the General Sahab was mentioning, that give them some incentive. This is actually what they are used to get incentives from people by twisting their arms. So this is the problem. Let me tell you, the problem is that if Taliban continue to follow ultra conservative approach, it would become more and more difficult for international community to extend any kind of help to them. Taliban should clearly understand this thing. They think they can use this as a pressure tactic. This is not going to work with the international community. They must understand that. And as far as the statement came from the foreign minister, bold statement that it's a red line helping TTP. As I said earlier, it's an expansion of ideological boundaries. They see the buddies on this side, and this is, if you look at their consistent statements coming in the past, they were calling them their ideological buddies. All right, they said that okay, we will not help them this and that, but I don't see any of their political promises coming true. They have not fulfilled any of their promises. Yet they become more hardened on blackmailing techniques. They want incentive, but if they continue to follow the ultra conservative approach, particularly with reference to the women education, I doubt that international community is going to help them.
Jadu Raza, already the Western countries have condemned this particular decision by the Afghan authorities of barring the women from going to the universities, and they've already started talking about putting in more economic sanctions against the Afghan authorities. It's going to be detrimental for the larger interest of the Afghan people. Don't you think these sort of pressure tactics are not going to come to the fruition, rather more economic sanctions are going to be imposed?
First of all, I think let me add to what has already been said on women's education in Afghanistan. In the past, I think the rationale which they have been putting forward was that under the Sharia law, there has to be a segregation of genders. And when they were banning the higher secondary education of females, this is what they said at that time. And I believe presently they would, I think, give the same reason for that. And they also said that they don't have the capacity, now of immediately segregating higher education arrangements for females. So I think one can look at that, even in many other countries, Middle Eastern countries, there is segregation of genders, and there's nothing wrong in that. But they need to clarify that. Even in Pakistan, there is some segregation of genders, even at the lower classes. Nothing wrong in that. But if there is any other reason, like it was being said that probably they want to use this to blackmail the international community, for further aid. I don't know whether that is the rationale or not. I think they need to clarify it to the rest of the world. Why have they taken this action? So that, any speculations about this, whether it is from us or for others, they are addressed. And you're right in saying, that if they continue these kinds of decisions, then I think it is going to hurt them as well as the people of Afghanistan, and particularly, the females and the women of Afghanistan.
So, General Raza, in that kind of scenario, if it continues to happen in future also, so what sort of options, especially the international community, would have at its hands in order to deal with the Afghan Taliban?
I think the more sanctions the international community applies to the Afghan government, I think the people would suffer from that. We have seen it internationally, whether it was in Iraq or in other countries. Eventually, these sanctions they actually they travel down to the people, and they suffer there. I would come back to say that I think all the friends of Afghanistan, whoever they may be, whether it is Pakistan or whether they are some Middle Eastern countries, they need to be engaged, and they need to be told that these kinds of decisions will not bring any stability or prosperity to Afghanistan, and they need to have a relook at these policies, which are a matter of great interest and concerns not only to the United States, but I think even today, even the European Union has given a very stern warning that these kinds of actions will have repercussions. And I think the present interim government of Afghanistan needs to take these warnings very, very seriously.
Right, General Raza, when we talk about the Western countries, especially the US, the UK, Canada, we saw the statements at that very time after the Afghan Taliban took over Afghanistan back on 15th of August in 2021. They categorically said that the international recognition or the diplomatic recognition was not on the cards. When we talk about the US, it was very categorical, and they also froze the Afghan assets. Also, the UK said the UK won't recognize the Taliban, but saw a scope of dialogue. Similar sort of comments from Canada. But after all these statements, we see it's not going to be an easy nut to crack when it comes to convincing the international powers in the West to give that sort of a recognition to the Taliban. What about the regional countries? They are directly affected from the spillover effect of the terror from emanating from Afghan soil, including China, Russia, and Pakistan and Iran. What role do you think these regional countries can play at this point in time in particular?
I think I will first want to mention, what Pakistan's position should be, or what the people of Pakistan feel about this. When you look at, the Afghan media, whether it is Tolo News or there are other Afghan media, they still do not call, the Pakistan-Afghanistan border as the international border. They call it, the Durrani line. That is a meaningless term, when the entire world consider this as an international border. They're calling it a line. So first of all, I think they need to recognize this border, and then Pakistan, of course, would consider whether they should recognize that government or not, because Pakistan cannot do it alone. It has to go with the international community, and it has to see what promises the interim government of Afghanistan has made. But I would reiterate, I think it is high time now for the Afghan government to make sure that they recognize this border, they respect this border. It is in their interest as well as in the interest of Pakistan that they do that. And unless that is done, I think Pakistan would have really no incentive to either urge the other countries or to consider itself to recognize the government of Afghanistan at an early date.
Right, Mr. Mahsud, very pertinent point highlighted by General Raza. When it comes to the Afghan authorities to respect the interests of Pakistan also, and in particular recognizing the international border, so then there could be a possibility that the Pakistani authorities could give it a thought of thinking about the recognition to the interim Afghan government.
It would be a transaction that would take place between Pakistan and Afghanistan if it comes to that. I don't think that Afghanistan Taliban government or any government can politically afford to recognize a Pak-Afghan border as an official border. They cannot do that given the political situation that they have. Given the other problems that they have in the country, I don't think that such a big decision they would be able to take. That is one. Secondly, adding to what General Saab said, there is scarcity of choices in Afghanistan for the world community. That includes Pakistan as well. If not Taliban, then who? And if you want to remove Taliban from power there, how do you go about it? That would result in a civil war that is not in the interest of anyone concerned. And if the Taliban are, the capacity of the Taliban is perhaps, Ambassador Akram said a very smart thing, I think it was very wise when he said that, a continued patient engagement with Afghanistan is what is needed, and that isolating Afghanistan or the Taliban regime was not an option before, is not an option now, and will not be option in the near future. So, with that in mind, I think greater engagement with the Taliban, building their capacity to address the economic problems that they have, the security, expectations that we have from them, building their capacity with regard to that, the border issues that we have within Afghanistan, even if we cannot convince them to recognize this and as an official, international boundary, at least, de facto, they already recognize that by putting their custom posts and their check posts and their border security forces on that border, and allowing the Pakistani side to build that fence on our side of the border. All of this shows that de facto they recognize that as an international boundary. The fact that they actually go and get their passport stamped with the Pakistani visa before crossing over here, all of those show that de facto they actually accept that as a border. So in more cooperation between the border security forces of the two countries in order to kind of the go and the back and forth of terrorists that take place between the two countries, so that can be stopped. And it's not just TTP, there is Daesh, there is AQIS, there is ETIM, there are so many other, Gul Bahadur group, there's the CNG group in South Waziristan, and so many others. BLA was also for a long time based in Afghanistan, and allegedly they still have some bases in Afghanistan which they used to cross over into Pakistan. So for all of those issues, I would say that greater cooperation, patient, continued cooperation with Afghanistan, and right now it's the interim government of Afghanistan headed by the Taliban that is kind of calling the shots there. So so greater cooperation, building their capacity to address their security issues and the security concerns of the rest of the world is, I guess, the way forward.
Right, Dr. Hashmi, your take regarding this particular thing, as General Raza said, that it's for the Afghan Taliban, especially in order to look after the interests of Pakistan also, especially when it comes to recognizing that what they call as Durrani line as the international border, then perhaps the Pakistani authorities might be giving a thought to give them a diplomatic recognition.
Well, look at Afghanistan we are dealing right now. It's the Taliban of 2000, 2 decades ago, and the same kind of a Taliban with more ultra conservative approach. The problem is that Taliban over all those 40 years with their different generations, they just learn to fight, and they are pretty good at it. There is no doubt about it. The problem is that what they have not learned, which is needed right now, is the governance and the political perspective. That is, they are lacking, and that is the main hindrance in dealing with Pakistan or anyone else. What they have done is they have gone back into the Indian camp again, which is certainly does not want to see any stability with Pakistan and Afghanistan. This is their major problem. They don't seem to have learned any lesson. Let me refer to my piece in Foreign Policy of 2012. There I have mentioned that was about, the bottom line was that there is no way but to talk with the Taliban. I said this at the time when people were not favorable in talking to them. Right, over the years you see that, over a decade you see that this approach comes in again, and today we are talking the same thing, that we need to engage Taliban, we need to communicate with them. As a communication person, one never break communication even with your worst enemies, and Talibans are the brothers, quote unquote. The Talibans are the brothers. Of course, we should not break communication with them, but continue. But look at their psyche. What this now? How Taliban see Pakistan? These new Taliban see Pakistan. They has sniffed internal security issues rising up in Pakistan. Pakistan's vulnerability that they see as a warrior. As a warrior, what they see in your opponent or your
so that calls for political stability inside Pakistan also,
yes.
and all the stakeholders sitting together in order to deal with this.
Yes, of course, we need to sit with them.
General
and deal
Raza,
with it.
one last question. When we talk about the US role in this particular regard, the US has offered unconditional support to Pakistan in its battle against the TTP. What sort of a support can be expected?
I think, first of all, we are quite capable of handling, these terrorist activities which are emanating from Afghanistan or elsewhere, and we have done it in the past, and we have shown it yesterday, and we can continue to do it ourselves. But when we come to, building the capacity of our security forces, then it is there that they can assist. If you need drones or armed drones intelligence equipment to trace out these terrorists, I think they can help there. They can actually dissuade Indians to stop misusing the Afghan territory, and supporting, let's say, some terrorists from Balochistan or others, or the former Afghan intelligence operators which are there, who may be actually doing some of these terrorist activities. So they can do those, and in addition to that, I think what they can do is that they could recognize the importance of CPEC for Pakistan, and again, dissuade Indians or anyone else who can hurt the CPEC. Simultaneously, I think we are out of the FATF grey list, but I think India is trying its best, to put us back on that kind of a list. So I think the US can prevail there as well. And we know that, the Indian use, territories of Dubai, of Bahrain, and many other countries again to bring in money inside Pakistan for terrorism activities. I think we have the dossiers, and I think we have shared it with the US and the UN. So I think it is there that the United States can help and assist Pakistan in controlling terrorism here.
Right, Lieutenant General retired Raza Muhammad Khan, former President, National Defense University. Thank you very much for joining us at Views on News tonight on Skype. Really appreciate your time. We were honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Saifullah Mahsud, President, FATA Research Center. Mr. Mahsud, thank you very much for your time also. And Dr. Moazzam Ali Hashmi, expert foreign affairs. Dr. Hashmi, thank you very much for your time also for being on Views on News. And that's all from today's Views on News. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.